November 21st, 1944, north of Formosa. The sea was dark, overcast, and beginning to rise. Somewhere ahead in the night, Japanese operators had picked up enemy radar transmissions, but no one in Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's force could say whether they came from a shadowing aircraft or a submarine. So the column kept pushing on through the strait at 16 knots. Kongo, the old battlecruiser rebuilt into a fast battleship, was damaged but still holding station. She had survived the retreat from Leyte Gulf, but not unscathed. Near misses had torn open her hull, damaged her propellers, and forced her out of the line of battle. Now she was heading for Japan to be repaired. But out ahead, another ship was already moving to intercept. On the surface, in the same darkness and worsening weather, USS Sealion was racing to get around the Japanese track. Then, at 0:20, her radar picked up 3 strong returns in the night. January 1911. At Barrow in Furness, Vickers laid down Kongo for the Imperial Japanese Navy. Completed in 1913, she entered service as the first of her class and the last Japanese capital ship built outside Japan. From the start, she was a ship of compromise, armed like a battleship, protected more lightly, and built for speed. Her 8 14-inch guns made her one of the most heavily armed warships afloat when completed. In the decades that followed, she was rebuilt twice. Her armor was strengthened, her machinery replaced, her superstructure enlarged into the towering pagoda mast. And by January 1937, she had been reclassified as a fast battleship, capable of more than 30 knots. Yet the compromise never vanished. Even after reconstruction, Kongo still carried the thinner protection of an older battlecruiser design into a new and harsher war. Before the Pacific War, she passed through long years of service, reconstruction, and operations off China. By August 1941, she had joined the 3rd Battleship Division under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, alongside Hiei, Kirishima, and Haruna. She was now fast enough to move with Japan's mobile striking forces, and that speed would define her wartime career. On the 29th of November, Kongo and Haruna departed Hashirajima as part of Vice Admiral Nobutake Kondo's Southern Force main body. Their task was to support the invasions in Thailand and Malaya. They arrived off southern Thailand and northern Malaya on the 4th of December, covered the opening convoy movements, then shifted again as Japan's offensive widened. After the destruction of Force Z, Kongo's force withdrew, then sortied once more to protect reinforcement convoys and cover the landing at Lingayen Gulf. In the months that followed, she ranged farther south, providing distant cover for operations against Ambon and Java, bombarding Christmas Island on March 7th, and joining the carrier force that struck Colombo and Trincomalee in April. But the war did not stay in that phase for long. In May, she sortied with Hiei and heavy cruisers as part of Admiral Nobutake Kondo's Midway invasion force. After the losses there, she returned to Japan. By autumn, the pressure had shifted to Guadalcanal, where Henderson Field threatened every Japanese reinforcement run to the island. In response, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto sent Haruna and Kongo, escorted by 1 light cruiser and 9 destroyers, to bombard the airfield. On the night of 13 and the 14th of October, firing from about 16,000 yards, the 2 battleships hurled 973 high-explosive 14-inch shells into the Henderson Field area. The bombardment heavily damaged the runways, destroyed almost all of the Marines' aviation fuel, and killed 41 Marines. Yet it did not solve the larger problem. The campaign on Guadalcanal continued to turn against Japan, and on November 15th, after the loss of Hiei and Kirishima in the fighting around the island, Kongo's division returned to Truk. Throughout 1943, she fought no major surface action, but that did not mean safety. Kongo took part in the distant cover for Operation KE, the evacuation of Japanese troops from Guadalcanal. She returned to Japan for alterations to her anti-aircraft armament and additional protection, sortied in response to the American landing on Attu, and later moved again in response to carrier raids on Wake Island. None of those movements produced the decisive clash the Japanese Navy wanted. The year became one of deployments, reversals, and adjustments. Kongo remained available, but the fleet around her was being pulled from crisis to crisis, usually too late and always with fewer options. In January 1944, Kongo entered dry dock again for another reworking of her anti-aircraft battery. More light weapons were added, more older guns were removed. In March, the 3rd Battleship Division sailed to Linga for training, and in May, Kongo departed with Admiral Ozawa's mobile fleet for Tawi-Tawi, where it joined Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's force. A month later, during the Battle of the Philippine Sea, Kongo escorted the Japanese carriers and came through the fighting undamaged. But the return to Japan brought still more changes to her anti-aircraft armament. The shift was unmistakable. Kongo still carried the same 14-inch main battery, but the war now demanded more and more from her anti-aircraft defenses, and less from the battle line role for which she had been designed. On October 22nd, she left Linga with Kurita's force for Operation Show 1, the Japanese counterstroke against the Allied landings in the Philippines. The operation led into the Battle of Leyte Gulf. There, Kongo took part in the surface fighting, but the damage that mattered most came from air attack. On October 25th, she was bracketed by 6 very near misses. The shock tore a gash in the blister on her starboard side abreast the bridge and opened 15 oil tanks to the sea. Another bomb off the starboard quarter damaged the blades of both starboard propellers. 3 25mm mounts were wrecked, and the ship lost 12 killed and 36 wounded. Kongo was still afloat, still mobile, and still dangerous. But the damage narrowed her options. She was no longer fit to remain forward without repair. After Leyte Gulf, Kurita's force returned to Brunei Bay. There, the ships carried out emergency repairs, while Tokyo decided which vessels could still be used in the south and which had to go home. By November 4th, the recommendations were clear. Yamato, Nagato, and Kongo were all to return to Japan for repairs. Haruna alone was judged fit enough to remain on duty and continue south to Singapore. Damage now dictated employment. Japan no longer had the freedom to send every capital ship wherever it wished. On November 15th, Combined Fleet ordered the reorganization that reflected that reality. The bulk of the first striking force was to return to Japan as soon as refueling was complete. The next day, the 16th of November, Brunei finally came under air attack. Allied aircraft struck the anchorage, but the Japanese warships were already underway inside the bay and escaped major damage. Even so, the raid settled the matter. Brunei was no longer a place to wait. Kurita was anxious to depart, and the damaged ships had to move before the next attack found them less fortunate. Shortly before midnight on November 20th, as Kurita's force pushed north through the Formosa Strait, enemy radar waves were detected ahead. On Yamato, officers debated whether they were being shadowed by an aircraft or tracked by a submarine. The decision was made to alter course and break past the contact at 16 knots with only minimal zigzagging. The signal went out to Yahagi, Kongo, and Nagato, and the destroyers were ordered to keep a sharp watch for submarines. Visibility remained poor. Formosa lay off to starboard in the darkness, and the ships of the column could be marked mostly by their wakes and dim outlines. The contact ahead was USS Sealion, an American Balao-class submarine on patrol near the northern tip of Formosa. She was under the command of Lieutenant Commander Eli Thomas Reich. At 0:20, Sealion's radar picked up strong returns at 44,000 yards. At first, Reich thought he might be seeing false echoes from Formosa, but the picture held. By 0:48, the range had closed, and the returns had sharpened into 2 targets of battleship size and 2 of large cruiser size, moving at 16 knots and not zigzagging. Reich sent off a contact report, then turned for an end run on the surface. In the dark, overcast night, with rising wind and visibility of about 1,500 yards, he drove Sealion hard to get ahead of the Japanese column. By 1:46, Sealion was parallel on the enemy's port beam. The radar picture now showed 4 heavy ships in line ahead, with destroyers screening them. Reich continued to work forward across the Japanese track. By 2:45, he had reached attack position on the port bow. He slowed, steadied his boat, and chose the second ship in line, the first battleship, as his target. Keeping his bow pointed toward the nearest destroyer, dimly visible at about 1,800 yards, he ordered his forward torpedoes set shallow. At 2:56, from 3,000 yards, Sealion fired 6 bow torpedoes on a 90-degree port track at Kongo. As the spread ran out, the quartermaster on the bridge reported that the target showed a high pagoda-like silhouette, definitely a battleship. Reich then threw the submarine hard right for a stern shot. Sealion came around onto a westerly heading, and at 2:59 she fired 3 stern torpedoes at the third ship in column, Nagato, from 3,100 yards. With all tubes empty, Reich ordered flank speed due west to clear the area. A few minutes passed in darkness as the torpedoes ran in, then the first detonations tore through the Japanese line. At 3:01, flashes and waterspouts climbed Kongo's port side near the head of the line. Nagato, followed by Yamato astern, instantly threw hard to port to comb the tracks of any remaining torpedoes. That turn carried them clear, and Sealion's second salvo crossed ahead of Nagato and continued eastward. A few minutes later, at 3:04, one of those torpedoes struck Urakaze on the starboard side of the screen. A brilliant circle of light flared out across the darkness, followed by further detonations as the destroyer was torn apart. For a brief moment, her position was marked only by flame and spray amid the Japanese formation. Then the light faded, and within minutes, Urakaze had vanished into the black water. On Kongo, the first reaction was confusion. Some of the fantail 25mm batteries opened fire blindly into the sky before the nature of the attack was fully understood, and Captain Shimazaki Toshio reported the damage. For the moment, it appeared manageable. The decision was made to maintain speed and keep going north. Sealion was already doing the same. From about 8,000 yards west of the Japanese force, Reich realized the battleships were still making 16 knots and feared his shallow setting had failed to cripple them. He ordered a rapid reload and pushed forward again at full speed into a mounting gale. Wind and heavy water crashed over the bridge and down the hatch as Sealion made 17 knots in pursuit. For more than an hour she had stayed with the force through darkness, heavy seas, and worsening weather, still trying to close for another shot. By about 4:05, the Japanese had detected Sealion's radar waves and began to zigzag. But the worsening weather was now working against Kongo as much as against her pursuer. Water kept forcing its way through its damaged bow. The issue was no longer whether Kongo could remain with the force, but whether she could still reach port. Vice Admiral Suzuki concurred that she should make for Keelung. Hamikaze and Isakaze were detached to escort her. At 4:40, Kongo sheered east out of formation with the 2 destroyers in flanking positions, while the rest of the force continued north for Japan. As she turned away, the list stood at about 15 degrees, and speed had fallen to around 10 knots. At that speed, Keelung still seemed reachable. In reality, she did not have the time. Not long after separation, the list increased beyond 20 degrees. Men were ordered to the high starboard side. The bow dipped lower. Steering grew more difficult. Hamikaze and Isakaze maneuvered close as the crippled battleship labored eastward. The collapse now came very quickly. roughly 15 minutes after turning for Keeling, the list had reached 45 degrees. Water was entering compartments that should have remained far above the sea. Attempts to flood starboard spaces either came too late or failed to check the heel. Engine rooms began to flood. Speed fell away completely. By 5:18, Kongo was dead in the water and unnavigable. Any thought of towing her was rejected at once. The seas were too heavy and the ship was too far gone. On the bridge, Suzuki and Shimazaki accepted that the battleship was sinking. The ensign was ordered lowered. As the heel steepened, the crew gathered and saluted. At about 5:22, Shimazaki gave the order to abandon ship. In darkness and heavy seas, men began going over the high starboard side while Hamikaze and Isokaze closed in to pick them up. At almost the same moment, Sealion's radar operators saw the damaged battleship slow and then stop dead in the water. Reich turned in for what he expected would be a third attack. He never got the chance. At 5:24, as Kongo rolled further onto her beam ends and the list passed 60 degrees, the forward 14-inch magazines exploded in a violent series of detonations and a bright red flash. A second heavy explosion followed. The blast hurled wreckage into the air and lit the night sky. Within a minute, the shattered remains of Kongo were gone beneath the sea. The action was over. Japanese losses in the engagement were severe. Kongo's sinking left only 13 officers and 224 petty officers and men alive, meaning that roughly 1,250 of her crew went down with the battleship, including Vice Admiral Yoshio Suzuki and Captain Shimazaki Toshio. The destroyer Urakaze was lost as well, with all hands, about 14 officers and 293 men. Taken together, the action cost the Japanese roughly 1,550 lives. By the time the rescuing destroyers finished their work, the scale of the loss was clear. Hamikaze pulled the larger number from the sea, while Isokaze recovered Kongo's senior surviving officer. The loss of Urakaze was just as final. Hope lingered for a time that the destroyer might still be afloat somewhere in the strait, crippled but alive. Instead, the search found only a wide oil slick. The remnant of the force kept moving for Japan. There was little time to absorb what had happened. The next day, Combined Fleet ordered Desdiv 17 to proceed with Nagato to Yokosuka. Another mission was already waiting for them there. From Yokosuka, they would escort the newly completed supercarrier Shinano into the inland sea. And for viewers interested in what happened next, we have a detailed documentary on the sinking of Shinano. Thank you for watching this video. Please leave a like. It really helps out the channel. If there is a topic, battle, or person you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also like to thank all my patrons and channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 per month, you will gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.